So in this video, we're going to talk about solving rational expressions. Okay, so a few key points to start. If a rational equation is in the form of a proportion, proportion is when you have one fraction equal to another fraction, so just one fraction equal to one fraction, then you can use the method of cross multiplication to solve that equation. So whenever you have a proportion, you could do the numerator of the one fraction times the denominator of the other fraction equal to the numerator of the other one times the denominator of that one. So this would be 6 times the entire quantity of the denominator, x minus 3, equal to 4 times the entire quantity of x plus 3. So essentially we get 6x minus 18 equal to 4x plus 12. Then we would solve the regular way. We're going to subtract 4x to bring all of our x's to the left-hand side and add 18 to bring our constants to the right-hand side. So we end up with 6x minus 4x, which is 2x on the left, and 12 plus 18, which is 30 on the right. From there, we could just divide by 2 to cancel out the multiplication of 2, and we end up with x equals 30 divided by 2, which is 15. Now, an important thing that you want to be careful with is that because the denominator has variables, right? Here we have x plus 3 is the denominator here, and we have x minus 3 is the denominator here. You have to remember about the extraneous solution, right? And an extraneous solution is just a solution that is a solution of the equation technically, but because that solution would cause some problem, it cannot be a solution. So of course, from before, if you remember, right, anytime that you have a variable in the denominator, there are some excluded values. So here the x value cannot be negative 3 because that would make this denominator 0 and you can't divide by 0. And also x could not be positive 3. Okay, and the reason why you want to keep track of that and make sure is because if at the end I got an answer and my answer was one of these excluded values, then that solution would be considered an extraneous solution. So it would be a solution that gets thrown out basically because that solution can't be possible, because then it would make, of course, in this case, the denominator 0. So you want to keep track of that. That's a very important part of the answer that you want to think about, because if it is a solution that is an excluded value, then it's an extraneous solution and it would not necessarily really be a solution. So moving right along, this next example, notice that this is a little bit different, right? So we have two fractions on the left that are added together equal to one fraction on the right. So you can't use this strategy of doing cross multiplication because that only works for proportions. One fraction equal to one fraction. So in this case, what you would want to do is find the LCD, the least common denominator. Because if you find the LCD, then you can multiply by the LCD to get rid of the fractions, right? So if you remember from before when we had something much more simple, like let's say 1 over 3 plus x over 2 equals 6, well, we can find the least common denominator, which in this case would be 6, and we can multiply both sides of the equation by that LCD so that we can get rid of the denominators. Essentially, that is the same thing here. It's just that now we have variables. Now, in this case, the denominator of this fraction is x squared minus 1, which is the difference of squares. So this actually factors into x plus 1 times x minus 1. So the factor here is x plus 1. So I'm only missing x minus 1. So I'm going to multiply top and bottom by x minus 1. And then in here, we have the factor x minus 1. So I'm only missing the factor of x plus 1. So essentially the numerator here is 1 multiplied by x plus 1 will still be x plus 1. And the denominator is the x plus 1 times x minus 1. For this fraction, the numerator again is just 1, so 1 times x minus 1 would be x minus 1, and the denominator is the x plus 1 times x minus 1. And for our last fraction, which is on the right side of the equation, that already had the denominator of x plus 1 times x minus 1, so we didn't have to multiply anything. Okay, now that the denominator is all of the same, right, we can technically multiply by that to get rid of it. So if I multiply both sides of the equation by x plus 1 times x minus 1, and of course I would distribute that to both of these terms, that's going to end up canceling the denominators. Okay, so a good way to think of this is once you get all of the denominators the same, they all cancel out. All right, so we end up with x plus 1 plus x minus 1 equal to 2. So x plus x would be 2x. 1 minus 1 is of course nothing, and on the right hand side we get 2. So 2x equals 2. Let's divide by 2 on both sides. And we get x equals 1. Now, again, remember your excluded values are important to note. The denominator here, x plus 1, means that x cannot equal negative 1. And the denominator here, a factor x minus 1, would tell us that the denominator, the x value cannot be 1 either. Well, we got a solution of 1. So this solution is actually not a solution, right? Like if I boxed it, no. This is what would be considered an extraneous solution. Okay? So don't forget, you need to make sure that you look at your excluded values, and if your solution that you get is a number that was one of the excluded values, then that's an extraneous solution, okay? Let's move on and look at another case where you have multiple terms, okay? So again, remember a quick way to think about this is if all of the denominators are the same, then they really cancel out, right? So if I have, for example, 5/3 plus 4/3 is 9/3, right? Well, really, those denominators, if I just cancel them all out, then this statement is still true. 5 plus 4 equals 9. That's still true. So this is a quick way where you can just get rid of the denominators if you make them all the same. So let's go in and make all these denominators the same. All right, now I want to factor x squared minus 4. That's the difference of squares. So this would factor into x plus 2 times x minus 2. And I'm going to first let's switch around negative x plus 2. And then I'm going to factor out a negative. So I get negative x minus 2. All right. Now that I've factored all of the denominators as much as possible, I see here that I have a factor of x minus 2. So I'm missing a factor of x plus 2 on this fraction. So I'm going to multiply, of course, top and bottom by that. I also see that in this fraction there was a negative, so I'm going to multiply top and bottom by a negative as well. Okay, for this fraction we're missing a negative, so I'm going to multiply top and bottom by a negative. And I also see that in this fraction I have the negative and I have the x minus 2, I'm missing the factor of x plus 2. So I'm going to multiply top and bottom by x plus 2. Okay, let's simplify, right? The denominator of this fraction would be negative x plus 2 times x minus 2. The numerator would be negative 2 times x plus 2. So that'd be negative 2x minus 4. All right. In this fraction, we just multiply top and bottom by a negative. So that's going to be negative 5 minus 2x. The denominator is negative x plus 2 times x minus 2. For our last fraction over here, We are multiplying x by x plus 2, so of course that would distribute to both. So we end up with x squared plus 2x. The denominator is the same, negative x plus 2 times x minus 2. Now that the denominators are all the same, they all cancel, right? Essentially, really, you're multiplying both sides by that denominator, but since all of the denominators are the same, they end up all just canceling out. So we end up with negative 2x minus 4 minus, and remember, whenever you have subtraction, right, you need to distribute that to everything that is on the right. So I have to distribute that negative to both the negative 5 and the 2x. So really I'll end up with plus 5 plus 2x. And over here I have on the right hand side x squared plus 2x. Okay, before I forget, the excluded values here would be negative 2 and positive 2. So I just want to keep that in mind for when I have my answer. If one of them is negative 2 or positive 2, that's actually an excluded solution. Okay, let's combine like terms. Negative 2x plus 2x would be nothing. So those cancel. Negative 4 plus 5 is 1. And on the right hand side I have x squared plus 2x. This is a quadratic, so I'm going to subtract 1 to bring everything to the right hand side, and I get n equals 0. That way I could solve this by factoring. Multiplies to negative 1 adds to 2. There isn't anything. So in order to solve this one, we're going to have to use the quadratic formula. Remember, the quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. And this is all over 2 times a. So in this case, let's scroll down a little bit. In this case, a is 1, b is 2, and c is negative 1. So the solutions will be x equals opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared. 2 squared is 4, minus 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a. 2 times 1 is just 2. Then here, here we want to go ahead and simplify, right? So negative 4 times 1 times negative 1 is positive 4. So this will be 4 plus 4. And 4 plus 4 is 8. So let me actually just simplify that right in here to save space. And the square root of 8 would break up into the square root of 4 times the square root of 2. So this is 2 square root of 2. So you're going to negative 2 divided by 2 plus minus 2 square root of 2 over 2. So final answer, negative 1 plus minus square root of 2. So we have two solutions, negative 1 plus square root of 2 and negative 1 minus the square root of 2. Neither of those are one of our excluded values, so that's a good solution. All right, let's try one more. All right, same idea with all of these, right? You first want to factor the denominators to see what factors are missing so you can multiply them in to get all the denominators the same. So let's rainbow over on this one. Multiplies to negative 4, adds to positive 3, negative 1 times 4, negative 1 plus 4. So I'm going to do this factoring on the side over here. So 2y squared minus 1y plus 4y minus 2. And the front 2 we could factor out y, which gives us 2y minus 1. And here we could factor out a positive 2, which gives us 2y minus 1. And then we could factor out 2y minus 1, and we get y plus 2. So this factors into 2y minus 1 times y plus 2. Okay. I could factor out this one as well. I could factor out a y from both of these, which gives us y plus 2. So let's see what's missing. We have 2 on the outside and a y that is missing. So we have to multiply 2y on top and bottom. For this one, we're missing the entire thing, the 2y minus 1 times y plus 2. So I'll multiply the denominator by the factored version, and I'll multiply the numerator by the simplified version because I'll have to simplify and combine the numerators anyway. And then lastly, for this one, we're missing a copy of 2 that I need to multiply on top and bottom. And I'm also missing the 2y minus 1. Okay, so now the denominators of all of them are 2y squared. And there's no need for me to write them down. I know that they will all cancel because I got them all to be the same. So I'll have 2y squared minus 1 times this will just be the same thing. 2y squared plus 3y minus 2. And on the right hand side, 3 times 2 times 2y minus 1. Well, 3 times 2 is 6. 6 times 2y is 12y. 6 times negative 1 is negative 6. And let's distribute the negative here. So we have 2y squared minus 2y squared minus 3y plus 2 equals 12y minus 6. Okay, 2y squared minus 2y squared cancels. We can add 3y to both sides to get rid of the y on the left, bring it to the right. And we can add 6 to get rid of the constant, bring it to the left. So we end up with 8 on the left equals 15y. And then dividing 15 on both sides, we end up with our final answer, which is y is equal to 8 over 15. Now, before I completely think that that's my answer, let's look back. Our excluded values are 0, 1/2, and negative 2. So my solution is 8 over 15, so that solution is good, and I'm done. Okie dokie. So I actually want to do a couple more examples, and then you can try a couple on your own. So finding the solution, again, when you have just a proportion, right, 1 fraction equal to 1 fraction, go ahead and just cross multiply, right? So bottom times top equals bottom times top. So this will be x squared minus 14 times 2x, and that'll equal 2x times 5x. So we end up with 2x cubed minus 28x equal to 10x squared. Let's bring over the 10x squared to the left-hand side to get this to equal 0. So we have 2x cubed minus 10x squared minus 28x. And I'm writing it in standard form, that way it makes it easier to factor. And I'm running out of space, so I'm going to bring it over here. We could factor out a 2x from all 3 of those terms. So I'm going to factor out 2x from all 3, which would give me x squared minus 5x minus 14 equals 0. And then I could factor this one, multiplies to negative 14, adds to negative 5. We have 7, negative 7, and 2. 2 plus negative 7, 2 times negative 7. So that will factor into x plus 2 times x minus 7. So we have 3 solutions: x equals 0, x equals negative 2, and x equals 7. Now, before I continue and just say I'm done, Thank you. Toodaloo. I want to go back and look at, do I have any excluded values? Now the denominator cannot equal 0, which means if x is 0, then that would not be defined, right? Then this would be undefined. So this solution is extraneous. Okay, so these two are good. We end up with two valid solutions, -2 and +7. Okay, let's try one more. B. All right, now with B, we have the denominator here would factor into x minus 3 times x minus 4. -3 times -4 is 12. -3 plus -4 is -7. So this is really nice because that worked out. We have both of these factors already in this first fraction. So in this fraction, we're missing the x minus 4. So I need to multiply that on top and bottom. And in this fraction, I'm missing the x minus 3. So I need to multiply that on top and bottom. Now that those denominators are all the same, they just are going to cancel out, right? So we end up with, on the left-hand side, x squared minus 20 equal to 3 times x times 3 times -4, which would be 3x minus 12. And then we're adding plus 5 times x plus 5 times -3, so that would be 5x minus 15. All right, let's combine and bring everything to the right. Let's combine first just to not have too many things going on at once. So we have x squared minus 20 equals 3x plus 5x is 8x. -12 minus 15 is -27. Then let's bring this stuff over. So I'm gonna, actually I'm gonna bring the stuff that's on the right to the left. That way I don't have a negative for my front term, my leading term. So I'm gonna subtract 8x and add 27. Okay, now I have my trinomial, x squared minus 8x, and -20 plus 27 is +7. And to solve this trinomial, I'm going to try factoring. Multiplies to 7 adds to -8. That's easy. -1 times -7 is 7. -1 plus -7 is -8. So this will factor into x minus 1 times x minus 7. So my two solutions are x equals 1 and x equals 7. And again, before I finally say, yes, I'm done, this is good, I need to figure out what are my excluded values, right? Excluded values, x cannot equal 3 or 4, okay? Now, 1 is not 3 or 4, 7 is not 3 or 4, so both of these are valid solutions, okay? So go ahead and pause the video and try these two on your own. Okay, so with this one, we have more than one fraction on the left, so we can't do the cross multiplying thing. We need to figure out what is the least common denominator, right? Now, you might think, well, 2 is not a fraction, but it is, right? It's just, if I wanted to write it as a fraction, I would write it as 2 over 1. So what factors are missing? Well, literally all of them, right? This is just 4, this is x, and this is just 1. You can't factor that any further. So here we're missing an x. And here we're missing a 4. And 1, of course, if I multiply by 1, is just the same thing. So that's irrelevant. And here I need to multiply by both. I need to multiply by x, and I need to multiply by 4. That way I have both. Okay? So now all of the denominators are all 4x, so they will all just cancel. So I have x times x, which is x squared, minus 5 times 4, which is 20, equal to 2 times x times 4, 2 times x, 2x, times 4 is 8x. This will be a quadratic, right? X squared, so I'm going to have to bring the 8x over to the other side to get this equal to 0. So I could try to solve this guy. X squared minus 8x minus 20. Okay, and I'm going to try factoring with this one. Multiplies to -20 and adds to -8. Let's see, 4 times 5, no. 2 times 10. Yep. So negative 10 times 2 would be negative 20, and negative 10 plus 2 is negative 8. So this will end up factoring into x minus 10 times x plus 2. So our two solutions would be x equals 10 and x equals negative 2. All right, let's see if there's any conflict with our excluded values. The excluded value here, the denominator is just x, so just x cannot equal 0. So our only excluded value is 0, which means that both of these are valid solutions. All right, so for this one, we have a trinomial on the bottom. So to factor this one, the coefficient is 3. So this is not going to be as easy as just x and x. We're going to have in the front, one of them have 3x. So I'm going to use the reverse FOIL method to factor this one instead of rainbowing over and finding what multiplies to equal negative 6 and adds to equal negative 1. Of course, I can do that, but this is just going to be faster since there's really not that many things that multiply to negative 2. So we have to have 2 times 1, obviously, and it has to add to a negative 1 in the middle. So that will be positive 2 here and negative 1 here. Let's see, that would be 2x, and then this would be negative 3x, so that would add up to negative 1x. So, yep, that's how that one factors. So another kind of giveaway here was that this denominator was 3x plus 2. Now, it's not always that way, but this just, sometimes happens to be that that's kind of like a little trick that you can use. So on this fraction, we're missing x minus 1. So I'll multiply that on top and bottom. And on this fraction, we're missing 3x plus 2. So now all of the denominators are 3x plus 2 times x minus 1. And if you'd like, you could do the excluded values from here. X cannot equal negative 2/3 or positive 1. So just keep that in mind. Those are your excluded values. Now, again, because the denominators are all the same, they're technically just going to cancel. So I just have to simplify the top and we're golden. So we have 4x squared minus 24x plus, and it's nice that this is a plus because if not, remember, if it's a negative, you have to distribute it. So positive 3 times x will be 3x, and positive 3 times negative 1 would be negative 3. And then on the right, we have a negative 4 times 3x would be negative 12x, and negative 4 times positive 2 would be negative 8. Okay, let's combine like terms on the left. Negative 24x plus 3x would be negative 21x. And let me bring down the 4x squared and bring down the right-hand side. Again, this is going to be, it's a power of 2, so this is a quadratic, so I'm going to have to get it to equal 0 to solve, so I can use the zero product property. So I'm going to add 12x and add 8. So I end up with 0 on the right, and we get 4x squared minus 20, no, not 21, minus 9x. It took me a little bit. Negative 3 plus 8 is positive 5. Okay, so here's another one that you can rainbow over, multiplies to 20, adds to negative 9. You can find those two things would be negative 4 times negative 5, negative 4 plus negative 5. But I'm just going to use the reverse FOIL method of just thinking. We could have 2 times 2, but the only things that will multiply to 5 will be 1 and 5. And both of those would have to be negative because we're adding to a negative 9. So we need both of these to be negative. So this ends up being, well, we need to add to a negative 9, so I'm probably going to want to multiply the 4 over here, because if I put it over here, then it would be negative 20, which is just way too high. So if we put the 4x here and we put the 1x here, that would be negative 4x and negative 5x, which would add to negative 9x. So if you don't like the reversed FOIL method of thinking to factor, you can do the regular old way, and then you could just split the middle. So you'd write it as 4x squared minus 4x minus 5x, the two that you found, and then you bring down the last term as well. And then you just group the first two, factor out, group the last two, factor out. So if you want to do that instead, you can. Let me just continue here. So we have two solutions, x equals 1 and x equals 5/4. All right. Now, I could just circle those, right? But don't forget, what about your excluded values? Look at that. 1 is an excluded value. So this is not a solution, it's an extraneous solution. All right, so hopefully you got those two right. I will see you guys in another video. Bye.